Welcome to the deep dive. We aim to cut through the noise on complex global issues. And today we're diving into the Indo-Pacific. Things there are really heating up, getting, well, increasingly volatile. Just picture this. A Filipino Navy SEAL loses his thumb. That was June 2024, a really brutal confrontation. Or just weeks before that, the Philippine Coast Guard ship Capingano, it actually had a 60 minutes crew aboard, gets rammed by a Chinese ship, leaves a big hole above the waterline. These aren't just one-offs. They feel like critical flashpoints, pushing things maybe precariously close to something bigger.
It's a really sobering picture, absolutely. And these clashes, they're symptoms, right? Symptoms of a much larger, high-stakes geopolitical game. We're seeing these escalating tensions, particularly between China and the Philippines. And at the same time, the U.S. is making a big move deploying advanced missile systems back into the region. First time in, decades? All of this has huge implications for stability, not just regionally, but globally. So our mission today really is to unpack the strategies at play here. What are the pieces moving on the board? And what could it all mean, well, for you and for the world?
Right. So the core question we're trying to tackle is, what are the real stakes when these big powers push their interests? And, crucially, how do these new military technologies change the whole dynamic in a place as tense as the South China Sea? Let's get into it.
Okay, so the South China Sea, it's not just, some disputed water. It's vital. A critical global shipping lane. Trillions in goods pass through there every year, but it's also a major, major flashpoint. And you have this 2016 International Tribunal ruling.
That clearly gave the Philippines exclusive economic rights in places like Sabina Shoal.
Right, under international law.
Yeah, but China basically just says, nope. Citing historical claims, they just disregard that ruling completely.
And that disregard isn't just words. It translates into these incredibly aggressive actions at sea. China's using tactics that, well, some observers call just short of war. We're talking repeated ramming incidents using powerful water cannons against smaller Philippine vessels.
Wow.
Even reports of hand-to-hand confrontations between crews. And that August 2024 incident you brought up earlier with the Capingano.
Yeah, surrounded by 14 Chinese ships.
Exactly. Surrounded, forced to turn back from its mission. It just shows how far China's willing to push things right up to the edge without, crossing into outright armed conflict.
But the Philippines isn't just rolling over. You hear it from people like Captain Daniel Labay, the officer on the Capingano. He was defiant. He said, this is our place. This is our exclusive economic zone. This is the Philippines. Real determination there.
You see that resolve?
And their defense secretary, Gilbert Teodoro. He called China the proverbial schoolyard bully.
Strong words.
Yeah, and he said the Philippines is determined to say no. And this isn't just talk, right? They remember mischief reef.
Oh, absolutely. China took that over back in the 90s inside the Philippines' own economic zone and turned it into a heavily fortified military base. That history looms large, which is precisely where the U.S. commitment becomes so critical. The U.S. has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. President Biden has been very explicit, calling that commitment ironclad.
And that's consistent across administrations.
It seems so. The Trump administration, with Defense Secretary Hegseth and Secretary of State Rubio, they also maintain that strong support for the treaty. But this creates a real credibility test for the U.S. train. Ray Powell, a retired U.S. Air Force colonel who analyzes this region, put it pretty bluntly. He said China has decided that at this point in their history, they are large enough so that they can buck the law.
So they think they can ignore international rulings.
Essentially, yeah. And the big question then becomes, will the U.S. step in? Because its credibility, not just with the Philippines, but with allies like Japan, Australia, even NATO partners, it all hangs on whether those treaty commitments are seen as reliable.
That idea of the U.S. as the world policeman, it definitely carries a lot of weight. Okay, so what's the trigger point for the Philippines? What do they see as the absolute red line that would demand U.S. intervention?
Secretary Teodoro, defense secretary, he drew a very specific line. He stated quite clearly that if China were to actually seize the Sierra Madre, that's the grounded World War II ship they use as an outpost on Second Thomas Shoal.
Right, a symbol of their sovereignty out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If China took that, Teodoro said it would be a clear act of war. And that, in their view, would warrant American intervention under the treaty.
Okay, so tensions are clearly high. The lines are being drawn. How is the U.S. responding militarily on the ground, or rather in the region, especially with these new weapon systems?
The U.S. response has been pretty significant, actually. For the first time in almost 40 years, they're deploying ground-based launchers for medium-range missiles back into the Asia-Pacific. we're talking about the Typhon system. That's the mid-range capability, or MRC.
Typhon, okay.
Yeah, and this system can fire some powerful long-range precision missiles. Things like the Standard Missile-6, the SM-6, and the Tomahawk cruise missile, which, has a range of about 1,000 miles.
1,000 miles? That's considerable reach.
It is. And the SM-6 itself is particularly interesting because it's so versatile.
Versatile how?
Well, people describe it as 3 missiles in one. It can handle anti-air threats, it can attack ships on the surface, and it even has capability against ballistic missiles.
So it covers a lot of bases.
Exactly. That flexibility is really key. And there's an upcoming version, the Block IB, that's planned to reach hypersonic speeds.
Hypersonic. We'll have to get into that more. But this isn't just theory, is it? They've tested this.
They have. Very publicly. Just last year, July 2025, during a big exercise in Australia called Talisman Sabre.
Right, Talisman Sabre 25. Huge exercise.
Yeah, 19 nations, over 30,000 troops. During that, a Typhon launcher successfully fired an SM-6 and sank a target ship. It was described as a significant milestone and really an unmistakable strategic message about Allied cooperation and capability.
And they put these launchers in the Philippines, too.
They did, even earlier.
Yeah.
April 2024 for exercise Salaknim 24. So that's direct deployment, direct support to a treaty ally right there in the potential hotspot.
Okay, so the U.S. is putting hardware on the ground, sending clear signals. How's China taking all this?
Predictably, not well. Their foreign ministry came out strong. They said Beijing is firmly opposed to the U.S. strengthening its forward deployment like this. They see it as happening right at China's doorstep and aimed at achieving unilateral military superiority.
That's their narrative.
Right. China maintains that they adhere to the path of peaceful development, and they're urging the U.S. to, quote, respect the security concerns of other countries and stop undermining regional peace and stability.
Okay, so the Typhon and SM-6 deployments are clearly making waves. But you mentioned hypersonic speeds earlier. That feels like the next level. Let's dive into that, the hypersonic edge. What exactly are hypersonic weapons? Why all the buzz?
Right, so hypersonics, basically we're talking about missiles that travel incredibly fast, Mach 5, so 5 times the speed of sound, or even faster. But crucially, they don't just go fast in a straight line like a ballistic missile out in space. They spend most of their flight within the atmosphere, and they can maneuver unpredictably.
Maneuver at Mach 5.
Yeah, that combination of extreme speed and agility makes them really, really hard for current missile defense systems to track and intercept. Now, the U.S. has done research here for a long time. Think back to the V-2 test, the X-15 rocket plane.
Way back.
Yeah. But the challenge now is that both China and Russia have apparently already fielded operational hypersonic weapons. So the U.S. is feeling the pressure to catch up.
And the U.S. is definitely trying, pouring resources into different programs across the Army, Navy, Air Force.
Things like the Army's long-range hypersonic weapon, LRHW, the Navy's version called Intermediate Range Conventional Prompt Strike, IRCPS. A lot share a common glide body design.
But it hasn't been smooth sailing, has it? These seem really difficult to get right.
Extremely difficult. The technological hurdles are huge. Managing the intense heat generated at those speeds inside the atmosphere is a massive problem. That's led to, well, quite a few test failures and delays across the programs.
And they're expensive, I imagine.
Hugely expensive. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, did an analysis. They estimated that just getting 300 of these new hypersonic missiles could cost around $17.9 billion.
Wow, yearly $18 billion for 300 missiles.
Yeah, and compare that to buying 300 advanced ballistic missiles, ones that also have maneuverable warheads. Those would cost about $13.4 billion. So hypersonics are roughly a third more expensive.
That's a really interesting point from the CBO. Because those maneuverable ballistic missiles, they can already do a lot of what the hypersonics are supposed to do, right? Hit targets inside defended areas.
That's the argument. They can perform similar roles quite effectively. And it's worth remembering, the U.S. chose to really ramp up hypersonic development after pulling out of the INF Treaty in 2019. That treaty used to ban these kinds of medium-range ground-launched missiles.
So pulling out of the treaty opened the door, and they went hard for hypersonics.
Exactly. But now you have this cost-benefit analysis coming to play, especially when you look back at something like the SM-6 Block IB we mentioned earlier.
The one that's an upgrade to an existing missile.
Right. It's projected to reach hypersonic speeds, offer similar capabilities, but the estimated cost per missile is maybe around $6 million.
$6 million. Compared to what for the new hypersonics?
The new Army-Navy ones are estimated around $41 million per missile.
$41 million versus $6 million. That's a massive difference.
It really is. And the SM-6 can be fired from existing ships and launchers, like the Typhon system. So it raises a big strategic question. Do you pursue the absolute cutting edge, the expensive, still being tested tech? Or do you leverage a capable, versatile, much more affordable system that's already integrating?
It's a huge strategic choice. Okay, despite all this advanced tech, this military buildup, there seems to be this shared understanding almost that a real war between the U.S. and China would be catastrophic.
Absolutely. China's own defense minister called it an unbearable disaster.
An unbearable disaster. Now, is that a genuine plea for peace or more of a warning?
Well, interpretations vary. Some definitely see it as a stark warning about the consequences, perhaps aimed as much internally or at the region as at the U.S. But looking at it objectively, a major conflict would likely be devastating for China, for several key reasons, analysts point out. First, their military, the PLA, simply lacks recent large-scale combat experience. Zero modern combat experience, some say. That's a huge unknown.
Okay, lack of experience. What else? Second, demographics. The legacy of the one-child policy means they have this waning population bubble.
Fewer young people coming up.
Exactly. So if they suffered heavy military losses, it could trigger a severe social and economic crisis down the line. Not enough workers to support an aging population. And third, their economy, while huge, has some real fragilities. Problems in the property market, issues with the Belt and Road Initiative debts. It makes them vulnerable to major shocks.
And that vulnerability connects to something you mentioned earlier, imports.
Critically important. China relies heavily on imports for essentials. Food, fertilizer, and maybe most importantly, about 80% of its oil comes by sea.
80%. Wow.
Yeah. So imagine a naval blockade in a conflict scenario. It could lead to the widespread shortages, potentially even famine, and massive government instability very quickly.
So even if they could, say, successfully invade Taiwan, the cost could be astronomical. Experts often call it a potential Pyrrhic victory. They might achieve the military goal, but completely wreck their economy in the process, become an international outcast. Especially given the likely support Taiwan would receive from the U.S., Japan, Australia, the U.K., and others.
Someone even said Taiwan is literally worth more to China existing than not.
That's a powerful way to put it, yeah. Highlighting the economic interdependence that would be destroyed.
And it wouldn't just be China suffering, would it? The global impact.
Oh, it would be a global economic catastrophe, no question. Given how interconnected our economies are, a U.S.-China conflict would likely plunge the world into a deep depression. We're talking hundreds of millions possibly losing their life savings almost overnight.
It's a truly grim picture. Both sides seem to understand this yet. Here we are, with tensions continuing to climb.
So let's recap where we've landed in this deep dive. We're looking at this incredibly perilous balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. You've got these escalating territorial fights clashing with advanced new military tech and these ironclad treaty alliances.
Right. And both Washington and Beijing clearly recognize that direct conflict would be, as China's minister put it, an unbearable disaster. The consequences are almost unthinkable.
Which leads us to a final thought, really, something for you to ponder. In a world where the military power needed just for deterrence keeps getting more sophisticated, more expensive, and where everyone agrees the actual cost of conflict economically, humanly, is utterly catastrophic, what new kinds of diplomacy, what strategies beyond just military posturing and deployments are desperately needed right now to navigate these incredibly high-stakes geopolitical waters?